this subcommittee. I would like to call this subcommittee meeting to order. And before we get too far down the road, the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development meeting is now commenced. It is March 24th at 1 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, in order to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. And with that, I will move on to item number 2, which is review and adoption of the January and February 2022 meeting minutes. Are there any questions, any concerns about the meeting minutes? If not, is everyone okay approving them?
I move that the minutes be approved.
Thank you, Mike.
I will second.
All right. I'm not going to vote against you guys, so that will pass. With that, number 3, subcommittee purpose, goals, and membership. Item A, ideas for action, review, equity topics. So I think where we are with this, y'all, is we have been talking about how equity plays into our work as a commission and also obviously as this subcommittee. And we've talked about a number of topics related to equity. And I believe last time we concluded that we were not ready to bring something to the larger commission, an action item. And I think we were going to regroup this meeting, maybe do some more review, and discuss what type of action item we may want to bring to the larger commission. So I think part of that discussion also was, based on these issues that we have been discussing, like lending discrimination, appraisal bias steering, where folks on Section 8 are living, et cetera, all of these various equity issues. I think where we kind of landed is we don't know a lot about these things and how they are showing up in Tucson and the region. So it's kind of hard to figure out what kind of action we may want to take. So I think what we were talking about is potentially asking for more information or research or something to be done around these issues to give us a baseline for kind of where we are with equity, broadly speaking, related to housing, and then from there, maybe action items could be presented. So that's kind of what my memory is based on our last couple of meetings. Is that what y'all remember? Where are we? What are your thoughts about that? And just feel free to speak. I don't need to call on people.
Go ahead, Lori, because I'm scrolling through some notes I made from past meetings.
That's definitely what I remember.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope I'm not jumping around a little bit, but or even off subject. But I was looking at some notes I had made. We had talked about, and maybe I just pulled up the information on my own. Maybe it was shared. I was looking at the places that do have source of income protection in place, like cities and in certain states and stuff like that. And I was wondering if we might have further conversation about that, either now or later down the line, about maybe investigating or reviewing their activities, as well as I see a note that I made about a December 21st meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, it's a legal action report, notes from a legal action report from mayor and council, where they were moving towards, it seemed to be moving towards making it illegal for someone to deny someone residency for income. Am I off on some of this, or?
I don't think so. Joe, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Michael's right on the money there. As far as I know, unless Allison or Neto has a correction, we're still waiting on the city's attorney office to come back with the wording to mayor and council for the source of income ordinance. And I think really what Jay's talking about was at the last meeting, we were discussing just what he said, that when it comes to issues like gosh, why am I blanking on what it's called right now? I just read, there's a new Washington Post article like the other day about assessment bias.
Appraisal bias.
Appraisal bias, yeah. So things like that we talked about, that we don't have enough information about how it's impacting Tucson specifically, and that other cities like Dallas, Philadelphia, we mentioned somewhere else, have done more in-depth studies than Tucson has, and that maybe we'd like the mayor and council, maybe we'd like to ask the CEHD if they wanted to advise the mayor and council to do one of those studies and commit to that. But we were holding off on that recommendation to the broader council. Now here we are.
And I think y'all are both right on track. Mike, I think the source of income piece fits right along with what we're talking about with what Joe just mentioned as well. Before this meeting, I was actually looking at the Dallas Assessment of Fair Housing. They call it the North Texas Regional Housing Assessment from 2018. And it's a fair housing report. But again, I think one of the things that for me is critical really to understand that for us as a commission, if we're dealing with equity, we're really dealing with fair housing issues in a large sense. There are some things I think that are kind of outside the fair housing context to a certain extent, but I think a lot of this really is about fair housing. And in the executive summary of that report, source of income discrimination is one of the 7 preeminent fair housing issues that they uncovered. So, Mike, I think you're right on again that's a big piece of the puzzle. Also, incidentally, a board member of mine who is a law professor at the U of A put together a fairly extensive report, I guess you could call it, or research about source of income protection and other jurisdictions that have it and kind of what the effects have been. And I believe I sent that to, I don't remember who I sent it to at HCD, but I think I sent out an email hoping that it would get to maybe to the larger commission. I don't remember who I sent that to exactly, but I'd love to share that with y'all as well. So I think it's maybe the most comprehensive research I've seen done in a while. But I guess where I am and kind of what I would suggest to the group, going off what Joe said, what I would, after having thought about it for a while, I do think that I would really love to suggest or move that the commission as a whole recommend that the mayor and council instruct whoever they feel like should do it, but that we really do need a much more in-depth report that's looking at these issues and that is garnering significant public participation so that we can understand more from a grassroots level what is going on in terms of equity. Because I think part of this too, the other part I was thinking about is like, as a commission, when we're talking about equity and affordable housing, like what are the foundational documents that the city has created or other sources that are out there? What are the foundational documents? What's the foundational information that we have that is describing all of this? Or, is it the HASP plan? Is it the, consolidated plan? What are the things that we're talking about? What's our kind of what's creating our common language and our common thinking about these issues. And I know that some are out there and things are floating around. One of the things I think that is actually pretty important, that's in its early stages, that we've all helped move along to a certain extent, is the affordable housing prioritization tool, because I think it's one of the things that does kind of cross over with affordable housing and equity. You know, it's really talking about, I think the idea, right, is that if we're going to build affordable housing, we also need to think about where it is, you know, not putting it in already segregated low opportunity areas, that type of thing. So I think that creates kind of a good umbrella to start as well. So, you know, maybe that could be part of this study. So that's kind of where I'm landing at this point. What do y'all think about that? I mean, again, Joe, you kind of outlined it. We've talked about it before. What else? I guess maybe a good question is, what else do we want to talk about today as a subcommittee? And are we at a point where we feel comfortable bringing a recommendation to the larger commission? So I guess those are my two questions. What else do we want to talk about today? And are we comfortable bringing something to the larger commission? Mike, I see your hand up. Guys, you don't need to raise your hand. You can just go ahead and.
I know, but Joe raised his, so I was like, well, maybe I should, do it. You know, something that's coming to the forefront for me, at least, and I know everyone else is aware of this. The fact that we have so many property owners who are raising their rates so that their current residents must leave, but then their properties become unaffordable for, in my view, the majority of our current citizens. To me, that's a concern as well. I don't know what we want to put at the top of our to-do list, but since segregation is in our subcommittee's title, I fear that some of what is taking place in the marketplace could cause, if you will, some segregation throughout the city limits. That's my view.
Agreed.
Well, I think that opens the door for me. There's been a lot that's going on this weekend. I don't know if anybody's follows the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They had a big thing over 2 days this week. And there was a really good thing that Shelter Force did the other day too, and it was about wealth gap. And one of the speakers was Jeremy Greer from what's his org called? Liberation in a Generation. And one of the things he was talking about was how it's really difficult to close a wealth gap when what we're talking about, we're trying to make that up, but there's continuing extraction from all of our communities that are trying to make that up. And a lot of that is, you know, people who have issues trying to rent, people who are being evicted, you know, people who, when you're trying to, whether you're trying to rent or own, trying to get a good credit score in, credit score has effectively become a proxy for race. So that's a racial segregation issue, and of course, an economic segregation issue. So there's a really good conversation. I think that that leads to talking about housing equity and affordability and the relationship between those things. And I feel like we talk about those as issues a lot without really getting to discuss concrete solutions. And I feel like even in the CEHD, we've got an affordable housing subcommittee, we've got housing segregation, and I'm not sure where a lot of this fits in, because affordable housing has really been focused on LIHTC and how to build new capital A affordable units instead of housing affordability. And this is a housing segregation subcommittee, so we've kind of been focusing on really like a laser on those issues and maybe not as much on the broader ones that we're talking about here. And Housing First hasn't met in 6 months, so I can't even talk about that. But where do these things fit? Where do the concrete solutions that I usually hear about are things like tenant protections, not just source of income protection, but rent control, good cause eviction, stuff like that. And then, it seems like Michael says, we're seeing a lot of landlords who buy housing and see it as an asset. It's a commodity. It's financialized. They want to own that. They want to get a loan against it. They want to have equity. They want to raise the value. They want to raise the rents, and that all gets interrelated. The value gets raised. They can borrow against that. They can buy more housing, and we see more of it concentrated. We see more of it financialized. And it seems like the antidote to that is more community control of housing. But I don't even know really what resources the city has for combating that with non-market, non-commodified housing via things like, I know we've got Southern Arizona Land Trust, we got Picklet, we've got, I think, Sugar Hill formed a land trust. Do we need more land trusts? Do we need to expand those land trusts? What resources are there for expansion of forming a land trust? What about co-ops? What about housing co-ops? Does the city have resources for people who might want to start a housing co-op like that? And of course, public housing is the other social housing that fits into that too. And I haven't heard us talk about any of what I just went on about yet. And I don't know where it fits, but I think they're all issues of affordability and segregation. So it's got to be somewhere for this commission.
I've had the same feeling, Joe, as far as who's going to handle what and some clarity. Now, and I understand there's going to be some bleed over. I mean, there just naturally is because of the issues that are involved. But you know what? As far as clarity of approach for these subcommittees, I think I agree with Joe on that, Jay.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that I guess the way that I see it is, housing segregation is an issue in and of itself. That's basically an equity issue that is caused by, the racist housing policies that were created, 70, 80 years ago, and that have either not been addressed at all or have been addressed in a limited way. And then I think housing affordability is another issue that, for all of the reasons we know, that not enough is being built, rents are being raised, all of the supply and demand, market forces and things of that nature. I do think that they're separate. And I think what you guys are alluding to, which I agree with, is that there's a lot of crossover, right? I mean, if you're African-American or Latino, chances are, your family had trouble getting a mortgage in the past and has not had the same kind of access to the housing market that white families had. And so affordability is inherently more of an issue for those particular populations because of the way that the system was created. So I think that's the crossover of affordability, of affordable housing. And I think, Mike, you're really right on, right? I mean, again, if you look at the statistics of, household income by race, clearly if rents are rising faster than incomes are rising, and incomes are already lower for non-white populations, clearly it's having a bigger disparate impact on those populations. So Mike, I think you're exactly right. I mean, if affordable housing is not dispersed throughout the community and you have rising rents and it's displacing people, I think the real threat is resegregation essentially, or segregating, going backwards in terms of desegregating, if that makes sense. And I think one of the things that has been lost in the conversation about gentrification, which is clearly a big issue that needs to be addressed, is there are far more zip codes in the past 20 years that have essentially resegregated than there have been zip codes or census tracts that have gentrified. So housing segregation and resegregation is as much of an issue, if not a bigger issue, than gentrification is, though, again, there's a lot of crossover. So again, I think that for me, the point of not the point, but what I really want to do with this subcommittee is I want to address those equity issues that if we don't address before we build more affordable housing, we're just going to continue to have segregated communities. Affordable housing is going to continue to be built in, lower income, higher minority neighborhoods, and we'll be basically back where we started continued segregated housing patterns and, limited affordable housing. So, I think the commission as a whole, in my opinion, has really missed a lot. I mean, almost entirely missed the conversation about equity and who has access to affordable housing and why that's important. Obviously, it needs to get built, but where it gets built, who it's built for, and who has access to opportunity. Those are equity issues. Those are, to me, the main equity issues. So that's kind of where I'm landing with all this. So I think I'm in agreement with all of you here, basically.
Okay. And yet, to add on to what Joe was saying as well, I mean, my utopia is a rainbow. So I would like people of all types of backgrounds and heritage and income statuses to live next to each other, just to congregate, to engage with each other. But that's me.
Well, and that's what the Fair Housing Act says that our cities are obligated to do. So that's what affirmatively furthering fair housing is, Mike. It's saying, okay, why are we still segregated? And we actually have a legal obligation to figure out and create more integrated communities that all have access to opportunity. So, Lori, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I mean, all of the discussion I agree with, but I'll tell you what I've been thinking about a lot, and Joe kind of brought it up about the affordable housing. We're spending a lot of time in the commission talking about building affordable housing, and that's all great, but we all know that's not going to happen anytime soon. And as someone who signs checks for hundreds of people for the rent each month, like the rents are they just keep going up. I mean, they just keep going up. It's just not stopping. And so if the city doesn't step in to do something sooner than this affordable housing, I mean, it just becomes a bigger issue, both affordable housing, segregation, equity to housing. And pretty soon it'll be such an issue that, like folks like our staff at the agencies we work at won't be able to afford housing either. So, not just the folks that we work with, but just folks in general, that if you don't own a home where you control how much your mortgage is, like housing is, it may sound a little dramatic, but I just can't believe how much I'm seeing rents raise every time one of our clients' leases is up. I mean, like upwards of $400 sometimes per month. And it's not isolated. So I guess my concern is, in the meantime, I'm very concerned about us building affordable housing, and that's great. And I think the city should be focusing on that. But we have like a big problem right now that's just going to lead to all the things you just mentioned, Jay. More segregation and more, folks living in places that are substandard, trailers, whatever, places that slumlords, things like that. And those are all equity issues too.
Yeah, something I've read recently as well is, and this is across the country, because the affordability issue seems to be happening everywhere at once in a way that like it didn't when the housing bubble happened. But, it is an economic development issue at the end of the day. I mean, if people can't live here and can't move here to work, it becomes an issue with, how well our economy develops, which is critical. And, back to the equity issue and the rental piece, another thing that we're not talking about that we need to talk about is, we're a commission for the city of Tucson, and we all know that the city of Tucson is not on an island, right? And, 50% of Tucsonans are renters, but that's not the case in Marana. That's not the case in Sarita. That's not the case in Oro Valley. So, the reason those communities are whiter, for one, and have a much higher home ownership rate is because they're whiter, and they, it's the whole segregation issue all over. And so, if we're not addressing the affordable housing issue as a region, I think also we're really unable to address equity in the way that it needs to be addressed. And I think the problem with the way that the system is set up, obviously, is, Marana has no obligation to cooperate with Tucson, has no obligation to cooperate with Sarita, But, if we're going to address equity issues, that's a big piece of the puzzle. I know that's a lot bigger bite to take, but, if you're doing a housing assessment, and you just do it for Tucson, I mean, that's nonsense in my opinion. So, though we're just talking about Tucson, because that's our commission is a Tucson-based commission. I mean, we need to be talking about this regionally as well. And that's what I think, if you look at these assessments of fair housing that I think really go into the issues that we're talking about, they're regional, right? The city of Dallas, I think, spearheaded this, but it's the North Texas Regional Housing Assessment. It's not the Dallas Housing Assessment. So, I think that's another piece of the puzzle. Well, so based on all of this, I mean, this is great conversation, and I'm certainly happy to keep having it. But, this feels a lot like the conversations we've had the past 2 meetings, which have been great. So where does that leave us then? Like, what do we, based on where we're landing with this conversation, what do we want to do? What kind of action do we want to suggest that the commission take?
Yeah, because of kind of, in my view anyway, we're waiting on mayor and council in regards to the income source discrimination situation. I personally want to table that one, that conversation until I know where they are, and I'm going to go with that. In regards to recommendations relating to segregation and equity, my mind went to, when you were talking about living here, I think you used the words live here, I think, in when you were speaking, and my mind went to survival, mainly because I'm thinking of, as we know, the rent's jacked up. I mean, I've just gotten accustomed to $1,300 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment, and now I'm hearing $1,700.
Right.
And to me, my mind is starting to head towards a New York state of mind where apartments were $3,000 a month. I mean, it's who can afford $1,700 for a 1-bedroom apartment? So again, even though we're focused on segregation and equity, I'm worried about people living in the streets at the same time. I just can't get it out of my mind in regards to this subcommittee. And maybe I should, but I can't.
I don't think you should. I think that should be on all our minds, and I love that this subcommittee is the one that brings those issues to the table. I go to every subcommittee and committee meeting I can, but I love that y'all are bringing those up here.
Well, and no doubt, I mean, everything that I've read says, because housing costs have gone up, there are more homeless people. I mean, it's not rocket science, right? So, Mike, I think you're right on. I think it's all part and parcel of the same issue. It's not like, oh, housing prices go up and, more people get housed and there are fewer homeless folks. I mean, that's just, it's the opposite. So yeah, I think it's part of what we're talking about. And
we know, like Jeremy Greer was saying, that we know who's going to be most affected by that, and that's why it relates to a subcommittee on housing segregation. If you're asking what you think the subcommittee can do, I know, as always, I'm not a part of it, but as looking at it from the outside and saying what I think as kind of a lay person outside of it, I think an advisement to do a regional housing assessment like Dallas or Philadelphia is a great idea. If all 3 of you are on the same page with that sounds like a good idea. And I'm not sure if that's exclusively Tucson, or maybe that is a Pima County collaboration. I don't know. I know they have an affordable housing task force, and I tried to go to one of their meetings 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was absolute chaos. It was just the worst. But now they've switched back to doing, maybe because of that, they've switched back to doing in-person meetings, and I can't make those. So I'm not exactly sure what they're up to, and whether that might be a group that's amenable to recommend a collaboration there.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Joe, because I've been wondering about that commission or committee or whatever, and the fact that they exist and we've never heard of them, or at least it's never been talked about, and that we're not collaborating with them.
Yeah, they had 3 or 4 meetings. I think they had 3 meetings before I had heard of them. And I keep my ear pretty close to the ground. So
Right.
when I heard of them, I showed up to one of those, and they spent an hour talking about their backgrounds and kind of why housing, meant something. And it wasn't an unnice meeting. I got to know some things I didn't know about, Corky Poster and John Bramond and Megan Headings and all those great people. But I felt like it didn't touch on substantive topics. And now I'm not, if those meetings are going to be in person, I probably can't make it to those. They're like on a Friday middle of the day, right? So yeah, I think that's a problem, but I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the talk we had about a Dallas style research project. And I'm interested in, like we say, I don't know who's going to afford those, the units that are coming up. Who's this? It looks like unaffordable housing, and again, I think part of the antidote to that has to be community controlled housing, whether that be explicitly government housing, like public housing, or whether that's land trust co-ops, those kind of things. I'm interested in what resources we have for those, and if we think those need to be part of the solution, if we think we can expand those. And the other part is, of course, tenant protections, which I kind of mentioned earlier. I feel like rent control is such a bottleneck. Once you have rent control, it unlocks so many other options for what you can do, as far as trying to get a control on affordability. I'm sorry, I see Dennis hand up.
My mic on?
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay and Joe and Lori and Mike. A little reluctant to chime in because I'm staff. However, wanted to offer this comment as the subcommittee steers its way into making a recommendation, whether today or at its next meeting, to the full commission, to keep in mind, in my opinion, what the city can and cannot do. For example, in our discussion about the rising rents, which we all lament, and we're all troubled because it affects us everywhere. The city has its hands tied. The commission, for example, could go to the city council and say, we want you to institute rent control. Well, the cities can't institute rent control, as far as I understand, because of state law. So just keep in mind what the city's limitations are. And as you discuss what recommendations you want to move forward.
Can I push on that? Because I don't want to keep that in mind at all. I think we keep it in mind as far as how we phrase a recommendation. But if we think something's a good suggestion, like rent control, I can call my state legislatures all I want. But doesn't a recommendation for something like that carry some weight a little bit more if it comes from the city based on the recommendation of a commission for equitable housing and development? I want the city to be active in those. The city pushes for legislation at the state level all the time. We know that we have lobbyists, we talk about federal legislation. That's part, the end of every study session. We see Andrew up there talk about those things. And so yeah, right. City of Tucson can't enact rent control, but the city of Tucson, I think, is well within its capacity to say, hey, we want to recommend to our state legislatures, and we want to talk to them and say rent control is something that we think we need. We need better, or we need better resources for community housing like co-ops and land trusts. How do we get more of that from the state? How do we get more of that from the federal government? And whether that's through the city or the League of Cities and Towns, whatever that looks like, if we just constrain ourselves to the things we already have, we're going to get what we already got.
Well, and I think to Neto's point, I mean, I think you kind of take Neto's point, Joe, is that, it probably wouldn't be very productive for us to say, we recommend that the city council, vote to have rent control or something. The proposal would be something like, we recommend that the city council explore all its options to let it know that its state representatives should do X, Y, something like that to push for rent control, or, to let it be known that, we think that we should be able to have rent control in Tucson or something. So.
Is it possible for me to be a pain to city employees? Stand by. Sit tight, y'all. To ask that maybe we could get some information about rent control, like the statutes, or is it possible to change it, and that kind of thing. I know you all are busy, but maybe I should be doing my own homework, but I'm asking.
Well, I don't think, Joe, I don't think that's an unreasonable, Mike, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask for. But again, I guess where I keep going back to is, if there's a larger comprehensive report looking at equity issues, I think that those are the types of things where all of that stuff needs to be viewed in a larger context. So, that's where I think this, a study or something like, this Dallas report or the report from Philadelphia can really dive into, because I think that's another issue that we're having. And what I go back to as well is, like, as the commission, what are our foundational documents? What's our common place that we're starting from? I think we should have, like, whether it's a shared drive or some place where we can go to say, hey, these are the relevant documents that we know that, like, the city has, or other relevant documents to the things that we're talking about. Because, and I think this would be a great place for, like, information about rent control to go. Like, what is it that the city can and can't do? What are the statutes? I feel like we kind of spin our wheels because, we've got the HASP plan, we've got the Affordable Housing Prioritization Tool, we've got the consolidated plan, we've got this, but like, how do all of those things fit in? And, like, what is it that the city has done? What's the city planning to do? And what will the city do around these issues that we're talking about? Can y'all put your hands on, mentally at least, like, where that information lives? It's just hard for me to kind of wrap my head around it. And again, I think that this kind of report could do that. And then the last thing I'll say is, I do really want to separate these two issues, because I think it's important. Like, the rent control thing, the fact that rents are rising, all of those things are things that we need to address, and maybe they fall under our subcommittee. But I do think, forget about what's happening right now. Take it back 7-8 years ago, when we were coming out of the housing crisis. Things were a little more, quote unquote, normal, and rents weren't rising like they were. Housing prices weren't going through the roof. These issues that we're talking about from an equity perspective, lending discrimination, appraisal bias, steering, where people can use their Section 8 vouchers, and all of these other issues that, I didn't list, those issues have always been here and are things that have never really been addressed. And they weren't addressed 8 years ago. They weren't addressed 20 years ago. And 10 years from now, the housing market will be very different. It just always is. So I think it's critical that we address these issues, because though the housing market is crazy and affordability is the main issue, you still have these things that are preventing people from engaging in the housing market, however crazy it is. Again, lending discrimination, right? If you're a person of color, chances are you're going to not be able to get a loan at the rate white folks are. That's just what the data shows. So what are we doing to address that? Even folks that want to get into this crazy market, there are still barriers to people getting into it. Again, appraisal bias. If you are a homeowner and you're a homeowner of color and you're experiencing appraisal bias, you're not able to take advantage of the market with the home equity that you may have accumulated, because your house is not appraising for what a house in a white neighborhood is appraising for. So while they're interrelated, they are separate issues that I think it's critical for us to address as the segregation subcommittee, because I do think that all of those are barriers to entering into the housing market, which we all agree is a little bit crazy. So I don't know if that's making sense of these, like the housing market is always going to be the housing market. And right now it's crazy. Sometimes it's not, 10, 15 years ago, it was in this huge hole, right? But these equity issues, these issues that created segregation and continue to keep it in place, are issues that have never been addressed and that need to be addressed.
No, that's very helpful to me because I've got notes, but I still need help organizing them. And what you just said actually is very helpful. I'm updating my personal notes so
Yeah.
I can try to stay on topic and on track with everyone. So
Well,
yeah.
it's hard to keep this stuff straight. I mean, they're different, but there's overlap, and it's hard to keep straight, Mike. So
I do agree, Jay. I wanted to bring up back when Joe brought up something, it sparked. I do think it's important to note that 40% of folks who experience homelessness are Black. So, I think that the issues are related.
sure.
So that's all, just because that's such a staggering number. And it's always, it's not just now, it's always been that way. So I absolutely agree with what you said. I think it is time for us to take action, really, to recommend some sort of housing assessment. I just don't see how the commission is going to move forward without hard, fast data, right? The city can't go spending money and doing all this stuff without something that shows why they're doing it,
Right.
And to me, would be so important, both for future planning and folks doing this work now. And I think it's worth bringing up. Doesn't mean that we'll get a win, but I think it's time for us to take some action and suggest that.
Can I propose something to see if this kind of captures at least where I am and maybe where we are as a group? Maybe what we could propose to the larger commission is we recommend that the larger commission recommend to mayor and council conducting some sort of study similar to an assessment of fair housing, like the North Texas Regional Housing Assessment or the one for Philadelphia, that in one place in a comprehensive way looks at and assesses the equity issues that are affecting the city of Tucson, and to provide us kind of a baseline of where we are with these issues, with the idea being that exactly what you just said, Lori, without a baseline of understanding, it's hard to know what we want to do to address kind of what we don't know. So am I getting to kind of what we might want to recommend to the larger commission?
Yeah, let me ask you for clarity, because I saved some notes for myself about a voucher non-discrimination laws in certain cities, certain states. And did you say North Philadelphia, or or is it generally Philadelphia?
So there are two reports that I was mentioning that I think you are referring to. One is called the North Texas Regional Housing Assessment. And it was spearheaded by the city of Dallas, and it's was produced, I think, to be an assessment of fair housing. So that probably just confused you more. But anyway, the report is called the North Texas Regional Housing Assessment. And then I also know, I think that Joe mentioned as well, that the city of Philadelphia also did an assessment of fair housing, though I don't know if it's called a regional housing assessment. It's probably, maybe if you looked up like, well, let's do it right now. City of Philadelphia Assessment of Fair Housing.
If they're doing a regional one, that has to be a multi-state one too, because it's got to do Camden and South Jersey.
Yeah, so there is one, City of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Housing Authority Assessment of Fair Housing from 2016. So Anyway, that's what I was referring to, Mike. Does that clarify?
Yeah. I could have misheard something. I thought I heard North Philadelphia, but you could have been, like you said, North Dallas area, Texas thing. So.
Yeah. So where does that leave us, y'all?
Yeah. With that, restate your proposal.
So I guess my proposal is that that we're bringing to the larger commission is that we are, and we would need to wordsmith this and get it more precise, I guess, but
Yeah.
or maybe we don't, I don't know, but we recommend that mayor and council conduct an equity assessment, or what did let's see, we recommend that mayor and council conduct a regional housing assessment looking at equity issues. I'd be inclined to say through a fair housing lens, because I think that captures a lot of this stuff if you look at these reports, in order for us to have a common understanding of the equity issues affecting housing in the city of Tucson and Pima County as a whole, maybe, or something like that.
I agree with that, because we must look outside of the city limits. As much as I know that I've been focused on our title and who we work for and all that kind of stuff, but yeah, there's bleed over. We have got to take the consideration beyond the city limit boundaries.
The other thing I would like to bring to maybe this is a separate thing that I'd like to bring to the full commission, is I would really like to recommend that, I guess it would probably be HCD staff or somebody kind of corral the documents that exist already that are supposedly guiding decisions related to equity within the city of Tucson, right? I mean, again, I feel like I know it's complicated and there are lots of reports and different studies and things out there, but again, I would recommend that, we have staff basically put all of the things together that create our foundational understanding of housing and equity in Tucson, and have that all in one place for us to be able to refer to, so that we're all on the same page. Because again, I think while we know the things that are affecting housing in Tucson, we're often not really referring to documentation or particular facts that are backing up what we're talking about and that are really informing our conversation. So I'd love to see, some sort of repository where all of this stuff can live. And maybe it's already on the HCD website and we're just not taking the time to look. But I do still think that for the benefit of the commission, that, every time we meet, at least if we've got a place where we can look at the different documents and stuff that are, already guiding what's happening within the city, I think that would be useful as well. So maybe that's a separate thing. I don't know what y'all think about that.
Yeah, and question to city staff, which you don't necessarily, I'm not expecting an answer for now. Is it possible there are some documents that do exist where we, as the committee, the commission and or the subcommittee, should have access to that information, where that information may not necessarily be allowed to be shared with the public? Could that possibly exist as we're doing our research?
So I'll jump in. I can put some links in the chat right now, but we can definitely kind of create a list for y'all. And that's definitely been one of the things that we've been thinking about over the last couple of years, as we've been doing research and reports and kind of, each time being asked to kind of have a different focus for the plans and reports that we do put together. I think that's definitely, you guys are noticing the struggle of kind of each time a new issue or concern comes up, kind of doing a plan or report around that. And so I think we definitely can do a better job of corralling those things. Right, just off the top of my head, what I would kind of include for everyone is, we have that analysis of impediments to fair housing, right? The old clunky thing. And then since then, right, have engaged in the housing market study with the U of A map dashboard that does have a lot around changing housing prices. And just right with each of those, then there's the kind of data backlog where it's like, okay, that's 2018 data. So housing market study, poverty and urban stress report from 2020 that has different indicators. There's a big data section in the People, Communities, and Homes investment plan that did, we did kind of a deep dive into several equity issues with Tucson data. And then, right, more recently, the HAST kind of worked to consolidate, right? Each of those had a lot of data. And so then the HAST brought together, some of the just kind of key takeaways that we feel like we had learned about housing and the need for housing in Tucson. And so that's there. And they're all they all talk to each other, right? They all have different pieces. And so Laura's here listening. I'm looking at her as we've definitely talked about kind of different ways to house that data a little bit better, and thinking about open data and the ability to kind of have a repository where folks can come in and answer questions that they have. So that is also where my mind is going in terms of really wanting to understand what we don't have, right? What's in the Philadelphia report and the Dallas report that we don't know. And that would definitely take some time, at least on staff's end, to really, kind of look through and compare what do we know and what don't we know, and how would we kind of go about getting that additional information if we're contracting with the university or hiring a consultant, or how we want to fill in those pieces. Because I'll say too, right, once we kind of have a good idea of what those things are, one of Laura's brilliant things about the Poverty and Urban Stress Report was wanting to kind of, we're using ACS census data year over year to do those. And so there's potentially ways to kind of just automate updating that data so that once we have it and once we know what we want to look at year after year, just automatically update those with the latest information. So,
well, and I think
just throwing a lot of stuff out there.
Well, and Allison, I think that it was something I was thinking about too. It's like, I imagine that a lot of the things that we're talking about are available through other reports, but I do think that one of the things that is lacking is all of the things packaged into packaged in a way that is equity centric, that's really saying these are our equity issues. I also do think that there are a number of fair housing things that have not been addressed, again, in any kind of depth: lending discrimination, appraisal bias. There's some stuff about, Section 8 usage, but there are a lot of things in there that I think haven't really been addressed. So, maybe it's about repackaging it in a way, or presenting the information in a way that is readily usable, because again, it's like, well, if we have our next commission meeting, our whole commission meeting, those things are out there, but they don't seem to be available in a way that's usable, right? I mean, we're not having data-driven discussions in our commission meetings. And, again, I don't know, which is why I didn't go into research and stuff, but it's like, how do we get that information packaged in such a way that is understandable and accessible and allows us to have data-driven conversations? And this is just a little opinion of mine, of having, lived and worked in Tucson for, over 15 years, is like, it's always very surprising to me how non-data driven so much of the conversations that are had in Tucson. I mean, it's like, it's rare that that the conversations are data driven. And I think it's a different way of approaching this work, and it's a different way. I don't know how to do it, but you know, when you're engaged in a process or a conversation that really is data driven, it's just a fundamentally different conversation. So, you know, I think that that's a room for improvement for, you know, Tucson, Pima County, but that's just my own personal opinion. I think it's a different way of approaching this work. So anyway, so I was just kind of jotting down, recommend that the full commission ask mayor and council to conduct a regional housing assessment similar to the North Texas Regional Housing Assessment that assesses fair housing and equity related issues or something like that. That's where I've gotten so far with kind of what our ask to the larger commission is.
Is that a motion yet?
I don't know. Did that make sense?
It did at the beginning. Now that we're at the end, I hate to say this, Jay. Could you restate that?
No, that's just as far as I'd gotten. That's why it didn't make sense at the end, because I got distracted by you guys again instead of writing the thing down. So yeah, Allison.
I'll just say, right, I think also based on this conversation, you know, in terms of implementing that type of recommendation, I do kind of like what we were talking about in terms of collating what we have. And I think we have tools to do that better. So potentially do a phased approach of some sort of kind of collating what we have, figuring out where the gaps are, and then working with you guys to work on to do a scope of work for filling in the gaps. So that's just one thought.
Well, I'll tell you, I think this is also kind of where Joe was earlier with this is, I understand that from a practical staff side of that's maybe what how y'all would approach it. But I think that the job of us as a commission is to not be limited by your capacity. Because I mean, of course, anything like this is going to require additional capacity. I know you guys can't take on doing a regional housing assessment with your current staff and all the stuff y'all are already required to do. So I know that comes into your thinking. It would if I were in your position, but the fact of the matter is, I think we need something a lot bigger. And I think it's for mayor and council to wrestle with the fact that, you know, if we actually want to understand, in my opinion, the equity issues and the fair housing related equity issues in this region, it's going to take it would be a heavy lift. And if we can't do that, we can't do that. But I think they need to know that, like, this is what, if we're serious about addressing equity in the housing sphere, this is what you do. It's not, you know, you kind of rebake what has already been, you know, reheat what's already been cooked. I mean, which is fine. And I understand that might be what happens, but like, I think we need to think of more of a big picture and not be bounded essentially by, you know, what we know probably y'all's capacity is. I think so. That would be my kind of response to that. I certainly understand where you're coming from, but you know, I think we need to have a kind of a big picture. This is in a perfect world. This is what we would want. I don't know what y'all think about that, but. All right, so again, Mike, let me see if I have completed the thought a little bit better. I don't know if I have. Conduct a regional housing assessment similar to the North Texas Regional Housing Assessment that assesses fair housing and equity related housing issues. Did I use assessment and issues a lot in that phrase? Assess the issues of assessments of the issues that we've assessed in the housing subcommittee.
Well, we can assess that.
Yeah, that's right.
It sounds fine to me. You know, and if you want to polish it up later, cool. I mean, it's fine as it is to me for now. Lori?
I will second that.
Okay. Joe, can I ask you what you thought of that? If there was anything maybe missing, or if that's good enough for now?
No, I think you have the intent of that right on, and you get to massage the language of how you present that before the full commission. If we can do that, what is that, like next week?
Cool. All right, I mean, I guess, is that a pretty decent place to wrap up agenda item number 3?
No, I have something
Yeah.
I want to tag onto the end real quick,
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
because I think it fits in here.
Okay.
We had chatted before about recruiting members. Has anyone had any other thoughts on that?
To the subcommittee?
I thought that was what we were. Yeah, I thought that's what we were talking about.
I know that Vicky Cusino had expressed interest, and she joined us for, I think, the majority of our last meeting. I don't know if I don't know what was up with her this time. So I know she was interested, at least. I don't know if that means that, but she's a non-voting member as well, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's ex officio. The recommendation that the commission voted on was that you expand there. It should be presented to the mayor and council at some point. I don't know what the progress on that is, but the recommendation from the commission to mayor and council was going to be that the commission is expanded to up to 15 members, I believe, and that priority be given to converting ex officio members to voting members. Yeah, but I personally wanted to see some, maybe new blood that hasn't been at these meetings before. But if nothing else, you could rethink the ex officio slots at that point. But yeah, if you want more people to show up for these meetings, the idea of going to 15 is that it's 5 per subcommittee, and that you get to recruit 2 of the ex officio members to become voting members here.
Outside of that, we just invite people to the subcommittee meetings, basically, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Anybody can show up like me.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that answer your question at all, Mike?
It does. I just, we had talked about trying to get more people involved, as we always do, at all levels.
Right. Well, I'm part of the Southern Arizona Prosperity Alliance that spearheaded the Fight for 15, and I have definitely told those folks about this meeting. So, but it's just hard, I think, for people to attend more meetings. So, but yeah, I'd love to have more people. So, if anybody knows folks that would be interested, please do invite them. Absolutely. Shall we move on to agenda item number 4? That would be HAST implementation, Affordable Housing Checklist Prioritization Tool. Is there any report, information, things we need to know?
Yeah, I think I'm going to turn it over mostly to Laura to lead conversation today, and use this as an opportunity to just let you guys know that she will be your official Housing Segregation Subcommittee liaison for the next few months. I will be on parental leave. So between Laura and Neto, you guys are in good hands. But yeah, and so Laura is kind of leading the charge on this tool. So she'll give you an update.
Hey, okay, so I'm gonna share my screen real quick and show you just an outline of current thinking around the checklist prioritization outreach. So we are planning to make a few changes to the survey from what you all have seen already. And what we're proposing is to remove the questions around race and ethnicity, because I think people felt like it was a little bit odd to be asking about that. And also it maybe was a little bit redundant with some of the other questions we were asking. So we're thinking about removing that and limiting the number of questions around mobility. There was something like 20 questions, and I think it was just too hard for people to really wrap their head around all of the different bike boulevard options, and it, you know, it didn't make the survey, I don't think, as useful as it could be when people are just trying to juggle, you know, types of mobility they don't really understand. So those are kind of what we're thinking about changing. And, you know, unless you all think, you know, otherwise. And so we might ask you to retake that in the new form. And so I'll be working on that in April. And also in April, it looks like I sort of fudged my timeline a little bit. We're going to put out calls for volunteers as inserts into rent statements to public housing, people who live in public housing, to try to get their feedback. And they're really the audience that whose opinions that we want. So those will go out, and we're hoping to get around 20 people. And we're going to do 2 public events with presentations that explain the purpose of what we're doing, and you know, how the survey works and how the categories were picked and what the categories mean. And we're going to do those, one on the west side, probably here at the HCD office, and one on the east side, thinking Craycraft Tower. And we also plan to make it very clear that this has no effect on their current housing, that this isn't about making them move. It's just about helping guide future projects. And we're hoping to provide gift cards for participation. And then once all of that data is gathered in July and going into August, I'll, you know, get it added to the map and analyze it, update the tool, you know, the sort of interactive web component. We also will develop an accessible version. So, you know, that was a big topic last meeting. How can we make this accessible? And we've done some research into that. And then show it to you all, you know, one last time, and then hopefully make it live around September. So that's the timeline. Does anyone want to comment on that before? I also was going to mention some of the things that we've learned about accessibility since our last meeting.
I don't have any comments. Anybody else?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Okay, so accessibility, we did talk to the city attorney, and we were referred to the federal guidelines. And what we found there was a page specifically about interactive maps that has this quote at the top is almost the whole guidelines related to interactive maps. I've just put verbatim here. Alternate versions of web pages should only be used when the main page cannot be made accessible. There are few instances where this is necessary. Live dynamic mapping applications are one example. In a situation where an alternate version is provided, it must provide the same information and similar functions. And so what we're thinking is when we do want to use interactive maps, one thing that will just become default now is to provide the data that supports those maps. And that's, you know, really easy to do. And to make sure to make those data tables as intuitive to understand as possible, and to test them with, you know, software like screen readers. And then for the maps themselves, you know, we have standards that we can keep in mind. I mean, not just keep in mind, but adhere to for color blindness, ensuring high contrast, testing the ability to navigate an application without a mouse, and ensuring that we use the alt tags and correct HTML attributes which are necessary for screen readers. And at the bottom, I've just provided some of the resources where we are, you know, kind of getting ideas about how other people have addressed this issue. And that's really that's everything.
Laura, I have a question. And
Yeah.
when you say data tables, You mean like things like a spreadsheet or documents laying out the data?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions, subcommittee members or Joe? And Joe? Great. Thanks for the update, Laura. Anything else for agenda item number 4? HAST implementation. All right.
That's the big one.
Cool. Great. Thank you. Number 5, call to the audience. This is a time when any member of the public may address the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. Due to open meeting law, Commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda item for a future meeting. Anybody in the audience that would like to speak? All right. Next steps, number 6. Next meeting, April 28th, 2022 at 1 p.m. What items do we have for our next meeting?
I will not be at that meeting. I have some PTO scheduled, so I know that affects votes. Or quorum, I guess.
I think with if Mike and I are here, we just need 2 out of 3, right? Cool. Well, we'll miss you, Lori. Enjoy your PTO.
Thank you.
I'm not having nothing off the top of my head is coming for items for future meetings. I mean, this agenda seems to give us a decent amount of leeway to particularly item number 3, ideas for action, review equity topics. It's pretty broad for us to talk about things we need to talk about in the meeting. Are there any other things that y'all can think of that we need to put on our agenda that we can't discuss with our current agenda?
Not that I can think of. I just got a lot, got a lot of homework to do, got a lot more reading to do, the
Yeah.
usual.
Yeah. Before I move to item 7, adjournment, I just want to double check with everybody and see if there is anything else that we would like to discuss today, anything else that before we go. All right, hearing none, I am going to adjourn this meeting. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
you.
Good day.